So, hey everyone, Dr. Mel here on the Inspire Life podcast. We are recording in multiple platforms today. We're live on Instagram saying hello to our live viewers. We are here on the video cast and we are recording on audio. So, gotta love technology when it works out for you. So, if I'm looking at different screens, that's why. But today I wanted to talk to you about seasonal shifts and triggers and how that influences our nerve system, not only on a physiological level, but also an emotional level, a mental level. If you've gone through trauma, how that impacts you, how sometimes even the change in seasons can bring up old memories, and talk about all that. But first, I want to start with a story. I was talking with one of my friends, and she was in what we call a contracted state, and just really feeling the funky energy, not necessarily from the seasons, but just feeling this unsettling energy, anxiety, lethargy. And, this is a woman who does all of her self-care. She gets adjusted, she eats well, she works out, she does her meditation, and she's doing all what our culture would say the right things. She focuses on her business. She figures out, how do I live my life in alignment with my soul's desires, with what I truly value? And I was talking with her and listening to her, and this is something that I see often in my practice members where they're doing all the right things and there's nothing that necessarily really happened recently that's causing, as we know, health is a process, but there's nothing recently that would have caused maybe a downward spiral, so to speak. And sometimes we'll talk about this in maybe this episode and future episodes. These contractions can serve a purpose. So I was talking with her and I said, let me ask you, what about this time of year is in your consciousness? Did something happen this time of year specifically? Winter months, darker days, this location right here, right now. What about this time of year is significant to you? And she shared with me this. She said, wow, I didn't even put the pieces together, but it was this time of year, 2 years ago exactly, in this state, in this type of environment, winter months, darker days, that I was going through a divorce. And it was very challenging for her. It was a very difficult process, not only from a relationship standpoint, but just the legalities and the way that they interacted. It was very challenging for her. She went into, deep depression and anxiety and was just in this dark place. And since then, she's evolved and things have really shifted, but this time of year started to come around again. And so I was educating her, and I felt this important to share with our community here, not only our podcast, but our video cast and live, is that sometimes we can be doing all the right things, and our nervous system creates patterns and memories in order to survive. When you're going through something that's challenging, where your nervous system feels threatened, your body has to process it first through all your senses, through your eyes, through your nose, through your sense of touch. Not only those 5 senses we're all very aware of, but also being able to regulate temperature, being able to regulate different pressures. That's why sometimes when there's pressure changes, those of us who have maybe gone through injuries or trauma, we can feel that in our nervous system because our body is processing all that at once. Now, what will happen is if there's an emotionally charged situation happening, for example, a breakup, a divorce, a physical trauma, an emotional trauma, or maybe it's something that's really joyful and really happy. Emotions are something that trigger the whole brain. So that flood and cascade of emotions, of dopamine, of serotonin. If we are in more of a fight or flight, we get the norepinephrine and the adrenaline and all that gets sent to other parts of the body to fight or flight, hopefully not freeze. So again, back to my friend's story, as this is happening, her body is in a contracted state. Her body is in a defense state because her nervous system feels probably somewhat threatening. I mean, I am a child of divorce. I know what that is like and what kids can go through, what adults can go through when you're talking about finances. You're talking about changing your home. Maybe you got kicked out of your house. Maybe you don't have anywhere to live. Our basic survival strategies and our primitive brain feels threatened. There's this flood of emotions, and all of a sudden, our nervous system is creating associations. During this time of year, this was happening, boom, neurology is connected. during this season, this was happening, or during this holiday, for example, this was happening. Again, that pathway gets created, that connection gets created in the neurology when there's emotion that gets laid down. Think of it as like we're carving deeper into the neurons, we're carving deeper into the patterns. So that happens, and then the event passes. But the memory is still there. The associations are still there. Now, when something, we know this too, when something is more emotionally charged, we tend to remember it at least a little bit more clear than something that's not. That's why when you're studying, it's important to create these associations to remember it better, right? When we think of things that we remember in life, generally it's, oh yeah, when I was 8, I went to Disney World and it was awesome. Well, that was an emotionally charged event. Or when I was 8, my parents were getting divorced, also an emotionally charged event. So again, emotions can lay down patterns deeper where it sticks within our neurology and it can be more easily triggered. Now, after so long, what will happen is unless that brain is stimulated through similar experiences, we tend to forget the details of the event, like what you were wearing or maybe the color of the person's hair at the time. Now, depending on how emotionally charged it is, you can remember that. However, we tend to forget those details that don't matter to our survival. However, our brain remembers things for survival, things that allow us to survive because it's evolution. Our bodies and our species are meant to pass on DNA. So we will remember things, it may not always be rational, by the way, but we'll remember things like when it's cold out, if I go outside and I get super cold and all of a sudden I've had this experience where maybe I was outside for way too long and I get frostbite, that's a threat to my physiology, that's a threat to my genetics and how I'm going to pass on my DNA. I'm going to remember that when I go outside, I should probably wear gloves. Same thing when it comes to relationships. We will remember things that will help us pass on our genetics and protect ourselves. So wrapping up, getting back to my point here, even with seasonal shifts, if there has been something that has happened to you or you had an experience in which you remember the location, what the weather was like, the seasons, the holidays, that's also very emotionally charged. Sometimes in the future, you can be doing all the right things. And if you're doing your self-work, sometimes those seasons can bring up stuff. I know for me, what I remember is that every single Christmas, I'd be laying on the floor in my bathroom, not able to go celebrate with my family because I was super sick. And I still remember I was probably wearing a gray sweatshirt and I had a robe wrapped around me and the light was on and the bathroom floor was this tan color. So I remember, right? I remember more of the details because it was emotionally charging. So even as these seasons shift, I still remember that. My point here is this. Give yourself a break. Know that in seasonal shifts, sometimes if there's been something that's emotionally charging, that's been traumatic for you, and again, trauma is all perceived. It's perceived by the brain. What someone else calls trauma can be totally different for someone else. Not that we're meant to live in that state, but start to get this bigger picture thinking. What's really important too is that you just become aware. So I'm getting into the how. How do we deal with these seasonal shifts? How do we navigate some of these triggers that can happen in our life? Maybe the holidays aren't a sense of joy for you. Become aware. There's this thing that I call AAA that my mentor Donnie Epstein has taught me over the years. And the first step is just becoming aware. Step out of the experience for just a second, because sometimes it can be really easy to get sucked into like, oh, this is happening, I'm lethargic. We get so sucked into that kind of victim spiral. And again, not to say that there isn't merit to this. That's why I shared the physiology before, that sometimes you can be doing all the right things and just the shift of energy in the atmosphere can actually be triggering your nervous system and firing those same neurons as though the experience is happening again. What do we do to change that? Well, one, we have to become aware. Thankfully, we as human beings, we have a prefrontal cortex. We have a cortex that allows us to maybe step out of an experience, access or more cognitive reasoning, saying, okay, is this experience actually happening right now in the moment? Am I actually being threatened? Start with awareness. How am I feeling? How is my body feeling? When I'm having this experience, where am I feeling it in my body? How can I connect to that? Number two is to acknowledge that. So number one, becoming aware of the experience, Kind of helps you take yourself out of it, not getting so triggered, starting to calm down the nervous system, become more parasympathetic. How do we then acknowledge what's happening without trying to fix it, without trying to avoid it, without trying to shove it down? Because the more we shove things down, guess what's going to happen in the next season? So the more we can actually be present, and I'm going to go live in our Inspired Living Facebook community later this week about becoming present and how that triggers the nervous system and influences the nervous system. It's important to become aware, acknowledge what's happening. Don't try to avoid it. Don't try to fix it. Just being with it. There's a power in being with things. And then just accepting like, okay, here's where I am now. I know that now I'm empowered. I'm more in it. I'm more present with it. I have a choice. I can either stay here in this state of contraction, or I can start to shift my awareness saying, this is temporary. This is going to pass. And maybe, just maybe, there's nothing that I'm doing wrong. Taking off the pressure, taking the pressure off of yourself. And maybe there's just something in this time of year that I'm moving through that I'm healing from. The more that you can practice these, what I call the AAA strategies right away in that moment, the more you actually can start to shift your neurology. So that way, when the next season comes around, when the next winter or spring comes around, when something's happened, you've shifted your perspective ever so slightly, thanks to neuroplasticity. Your brain has changed ever so slightly where you don't get as triggered, which is a really, really, really powerful place to be. And I'm going to talk more about this in future episodes, in future videocasts, on future lives. But it's important to just become aware of your experience. Acknowledge, hey, Dave, acknowledge the experience and accept it. Listen, we live in a culture where oftentimes if there's something wrong happening, we're so quick to fix it, to numb it, and go right, and that creates more of that stress physiology. I'm asking you to do the exact opposite and actually learn game face. Yes, I got my game face on. We got people tuning in live here. Learning how to be with things, learning how to be present in your experience, as I'm going to talk about, actually helps shift the neurology, getting out of trauma and into triumph, because we're not going to change the past. What we can change is our perception of the past. And the more we practice these little yet powerful strategies, you actually are creating new pathways in your nervous system and in your brain to start to see the world and experience these seasons differently, which in turn is a beautiful thing because you're going to have effects on how you perceive the holidays, your nervous system and what it controls internally, your immune system, your digestive system, your sleep rhythms, your menstrual cycles. You know, that's one big thing that I focus on in the office is how do we allow the spine to stay in alignment, because spinal alignment is directly correlated to brain function and how we perceive the world. Everything has to come in through our five senses, up the spine and the spinal cord, into the brainstem, through the thalamus, which is the filtering relay system, into the cortex. So that's how I help people stay in alignment during the holiday season. Now, beyond this, after you've done the AAA, sometimes I get this takes practice, and it can take time. If you've had, a big trauma, something big happened, right? It takes time, it takes consistency, and it takes repetition. Neurons don't just get laid down in a day, right? It takes time. So another thing that I like to give people to practice when it comes to reshifting your neurology and reshifting your focus and your awareness is I call it the W310. So actually, it should be W cubed 10, is what went well. What went well today? I like to write out 10 things at the end of the day, right before you go to sleep, 10 things that went well today. Because our brain is conditioned to actually focus on the bad because of survival, right? Our brain is conditioned to focus on threats because it helps, again, during times of fight or flight, during times of stress, it helps us survive. And we got to practice using our bigger brains. We as human beings evolved to use this. So we got to use it or we lose it. So I call it the W310. What went well? So here's your challenge. Here's my invitation for you to practice is write down 10 things every single night that went well during your day. And this can take time. If you're very focused on things that go wrong or things that don't work out, or maybe you're a recovering perfectionist like me, it can take time. So focusing on what went well. And my friends, it can be as simple as this, is that you got up and you showered today. You got up and you washed your hair. You got up and you shaved your legs. You brushed your teeth. The more you do this, the more you are priming your nervous system to create new pathways to focus on what went well and what is going well in your life. Again, I share the AAA before what went well strategy because I don't want you to become disillusioned to the fact that stress and things happen that don't always feel pleasurable. Life isn't about avoiding pain. Life is about how you change your relationship to pain. So I invite you to try the what went well. I call it the W310. I do a little W3 cubed and then 10. I've been doing 11 lately. So if you want to write down 20, I think that's a great idea. But what went well? And the more that you can do this, again, everything requires consistency, repetition. You're going to start to notice as you do this, you wake up, your brain is going to start to find things that are working for you because it is our natural state to be in balance, to be in homeostasis, to help the nervous system find a sense of more coherence within the world around us. Our bodies don't like being in fight or flight all the time because it's not healthy. It's not supportive of our future evolution. Now, initially, fight or flight is good, but we want it to be temporary, okay? So again, to back up, to recap what we talked about in this episode, less pressure on yourself. In the seasonal shifts, yes, it's important to do all the right things and the healthy things and stay in alignment and eat well and drink water and all that, but this isn't about behavior modification. This is about tuning in with yourself and checking in with yourself and doing things that are in alignment and of value in your world. So becoming aware, okay, I'm having this experience, I'm having this trigger, and rather than necessarily trying to figure out what it is right away, how can you just become aware of your sensations of your body? How can you become more present to the experience in the now? The more you do that, the more you get out of firing past patterns. Acknowledging it, acknowledging this feeling, this sensation in your body, and accepting it. In that moment of acceptance, you also create a level of responsibility for yourself. It's not just accepting it and ignoring it and being like, oh, woe is me, I'm going to stay here. But rather, once you accept the experience, you're in control, you're in power, and you therefore have choice and responsibility to take new actions. Even if that means then moving into focusing on what went well today. And of course, well is relative. Did you make $1 million today? Or did you donate $1 million to a nonprofit? Whatever it is, you have to focus on what works for you and what's in alignment for you. And I guarantee the more you do this, the more you're actually going to start to realize, what is in alignment for me? Regardless of what's happened to me in the past, what is in alignment for me now in this season of my life? Maybe it's slowing down. Maybe it's not cram-packing your schedule. Maybe it's hanging out with your friends and family. Or maybe it's doing this type of work where next holiday season, you feel more empowered, inspired, and alive because you are at choice. And you're not a victim of your past experiences. So I hope this brings you some value today, my friends. I appreciate all of you who tuned in live, all of you who are watching on our video cast, and all of you who are listening to our Inspire Life podcast. Make sure you follow and subscribe on all of these platforms. And I really, again, appreciate being able to have these platforms to share with you some powerful strategies that have helped me stay in alignment during the seasonal shifts. And in turn, I'm grateful to be able to share them with you. So thanks for tuning in, everyone, on all of our platforms. I'm going to say goodbye for now and give you guys a wave. And as always, keep inspiring. See you in the next episode.